Hey, y'all ready to start? Let's do it. All right. So last week, we jumped right in, didn't we? We had fun. Put you in a few situations. I just wanted to see kind of your ethical intuitions. I pointed out last week that there will be some times, depending on what we're talking about, that there will be some genuine disagreements, even among believers. I mean, not all believers agree on everything. One of the examples I gave last week was you'll see Christians disagree on when, for example, abortion is morally permissible. You know, some will say that, for example, rape is a morally sufficient reason for an abortion, and I mean Christians, and then you'll have others that will say, no, that's just not the case. So some of the things that we're going to discuss, there's a little bit of an edge to it, and what we're trying to do is to talk through those things, to work through those things. And as I mentioned last week, what we're going to do is we're going to start, I want to give you a little bit of a foundation, because when you're talking and making ethical judgments, it's good to know where you're coming from. There are times where Christians will look at the consequences of choices in their deliberations to help them make a moral decision. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. However, people typically will be very hesitant to say that the ends always justify the means, right? We'll get to that theory, not this week, but we'll get to it next week. It's called utilitarianism. We'll get to it. Last week, just for a quick review, in case you weren't here, one of the things that I pointed out is there are things beyond theory that are important when you are doing ethics. And sometimes the disagreements that we have with people they're not necessarily moral disagreements. Sometimes what we're disagreeing on are matters of definition, right? You remember that? Sometimes we're disagreeing on, so when it comes to the abortion discussion, everybody's agreeing that it's wrong to take an innocent human or an innocent person's life, but they're disagreeing on what a human person is. So the life in the womb, for example, a number of ethicists would say it's biologically human. Nobody's really wondering that. But it doesn't mean that it's a human person where they're rational, they're emotional, they're self-aware, they're making decisions and those kinds of things. That's what a person would be, and persons have rights. But just being biologically human, some would argue, like Peter Singer, not so. Notice that's a matter of a definition, right? So definitions really matter. Sometimes you need more information. There are factual issues that are really important before you can make a good judgment on a situation. Some of the examples that we talked about last week, if you want to say that it's important to have an equal distribution of wealth, you might want to ask this question. Well, what is the current distribution of wealth? You might want to ask this question. How many people are poor? There's another definition. How do we define poor? How do we define rich? What extent does redistribution affect the incentive to produce wealth? You might want an answer to that question. Those are important, right? And especially if you're telling somebody, hey, this is what we should do. You might want to get some answers to those questions. And then there was another thing, and it was, you know what, sometimes we just genuinely morally disagree with each other. We're fine with our definitions. You know, we have all of the relevant information. We just genuinely disagree with each other. The reason that I started that way was to say, you need to kind of have your ear up to know where you're disagreeing with someone, when in fact you're disagreeing with them. Does that make sense? Where is it? Okay. And then the way that we ended was you also need to make sure that you know the difference between what are called descriptive statements and normative or prescriptive statements. So when you get into moral prescriptions, you're actually telling someone what they ought to do, right? You're not making a suggestion at that point. You're actually saying this is the morally right thing to do. And with that, you're actually talking about moral obligations that people have. Whereas descriptive statements are just saying the way things are. It's not saying necessarily what you should do. It's just saying it's just what is. I gave you the example last week of Lot and his daughters, right? Where you have the messengers that come into the city. They go into his home. This is in Genesis 19, if I remember right. They go into his home. They have surrounded the city, and they say, send them out to us. And it wasn't good, by the way. They're not the welcoming party, right? They were going to bring harm to these people. And instead, what does Lot say? No, I'm not going to do that, but I'll send my 2 virgin daughters out. And you're like, wait, what? And when you read a passage like that, you go, what's going on in the Bible? I mean, what a weirdo. Well, the thing that I pointed out was, it's telling you what happened. It's not telling you that Lot should have done that. It's just telling you Lot did that. And in fact, if you read Genesis 19 and the way that the story unfolds, he's held up as a negative example, which is basically a way of saying, don't do what Lot did. And the other thing is you see the messengers that were sent from God, they step out and do what should have been done. They put a judgment down on the people that were outside of them. You remember a number of them are getting blinded. They're like going back into the city, and it's like, because they're from Texas, and that's what they would have said, right? So you see when you read the whole story, you go, I don't think I'm supposed to follow Lot's example. And as a father of 4 daughters, I wouldn't follow Lot's example. I mean, if somebody surrounds my house, I'm like, you better get ready. You better get ready, because we're going down with a fight, right? Because I'm going to protect my babies. That's the way we work. Normative versus descriptive statements. Are you hearing this is what you should do? Or are you just hearing this is what's going on? Like they're giving descriptions, maybe trying to figure out what should we do? I will tell you, as a pastor, I have sat down with families and had to think through very difficult moral decisions that they're having to make. Very difficult. When they're having to make a judgment on whether or not it is time to stop life support for their family member, that is not easy, because you feel the weight of the moment, and you have just kind of intuitively, you have this value for life. And people are trying to do the right thing. And they're sitting there going, I'm trying to figure out what the right thing is to do, right? They're genuinely difficult situations that you can find yourself in. But tonight, we're going to shift gears a little bit. As I said, what we're going to get into, and for those of you that are note takers, get ready to take some notes. We're going to get into some of our some ethical theories. And I said what we'll do is we'll begin with relativism for a number of reasons. We'll begin there. The main reason that I'm beginning there is because, I have daughters that are Gen Z. I'm Gen X. We're the best. But I've got daughters that are Gen Z, so I'm raising these people. And if you look at the studies, Gen Z has a particular affinity for relativism. And what I mean by relativism is that there's no fixed nature to truth. There's no fixed nature to truth. If you find that there is an adage that really represents that generation well, you might hear them say something like, you do you, or this is my truth. Have you ever heard something like that? This is my truth, but that's your truth. They don't necessarily have any particular problem with you saying that you are a Christian and that really matters to you, because that's your truth, right? And that's something that you want to choose and you want to live by. And so they're not necessarily going to make a judgment. They may look and go, yeah, that's just not the way that I'm going to live. This is my truth. And then they'll tell you their story. When you hear something like that, you've already kind of stepped over into relativism. You've already stepped there, right? So you do you, or that's your truth. That would be an example. We're going to focus a lot of what we're talking about tonight on mostly on the moral aspect of this. But however, when you say something, and this is really important with the way that we begin, when you say that the truth is relative, you're not picking a category, you're saying this is the nature of truth. Do you understand what I'm saying? So, for example, if I were to say, okay, let's do math. 1 + 1 is 2. You know that even that's getting pushback right now. I'm not making that up. However, if you were to go to one of our research universities and you were going to major in engineering, you're going to need math to be a fixed thing. You don't want somebody that thinks that 1 + 1 is 8 to build a bridge for you. You don't. And the other thing is, and I'm trying to give you a different category here, because if you say that truth is relative, you're not just saying moral truth is relative, you're saying the very nature of truth is relative. Do you see what I'm getting at? And that's why I said, well, let's just shift gears and go to a different category. Let's talk math. And even there, you're starting to get some pushback. Okay, fine. Well, it's not fine. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. But do you get the idea of what I'm saying? There's something I want to read to you. This comes from, there's an ethicist, Louis Poijman. It looks like Pojman, P-O-J-M-A-N. He passed away some years ago, but he has a book on ethics. And there's an interview that he documents here with the serial killer Ted Bundy. How many of y'all remember Ted Bundy? Y'all remember him? Man, that guy was hardcore. I think it was found for having raped and murdered 33 women, something like that. But he said that it was actually a lot more than that. So, who knows? I think we know of 33. I think that's right. I think he's suspected of over 100. But I think 33 are what's known before he was executed. But this is something that was in an interview with Ted Bundy. Here's what he said. He said, I learned that all moral judgments are value judgments, that all value judgments are subjective, that none can be proved to be either right or wrong. I even read somewhere that the Chief Justice of the United States had written that the American Constitution expressed nothing more than collective value judgments. Now, just so you know, if you don't know, Ted Bundy had actually studied law, so keep that in mind. He said, so the American Constitution expressed nothing more than collective value judgments. He went on to say, believe it or not, I figured it out for myself, what apparently the Chief Justice couldn't figure out for himself, that if the rationality of one value judgment was 0, multiplying it by millions wouldn't make it one whit more rational. Nor is there any reason to obey the law for anyone like myself who has the boldness and daring, the strength of character to throw off its shackles. I discovered that to become truly free, truly unfettered, I had to become truly uninhibited. He did, by the way. And I quickly discovered that the greatest obstacle to my freedom, the greatest block and limitation to it, consists in the insupportable value judgment that I was bound to respect the rights of others. And I asked myself, who are these others? Other human beings with human rights? Why is it more wrong to kill a human animal than any other animal, a pig or a sheep or a steer? Is your life more valuable to you than a hog's life is to a hog? Why should I be willing to sacrifice my pleasure more for the one than for the other? Surely you would not, in this age of scientific enlightenment, declare that God or nature has marked some pleasures as moral and good and others as immoral or bad. In any case, let me assure you, my dear young lady, because it was recorded, that there's absolutely no comparison between the pleasure that I might take in eating ham and the pleasure that I anticipate in raping and murdering you. That is the honest conclusion to which my education has led me after the most conscientious examination of my spontaneous and uninhibited self. And that's the end of the recording. Now, why did I start like that? One is it's the evening, and I wanted to make sure that you children were awake. The other reason that I started that way is if you really buy relativism, he's right. He's actually right. Let me pull a couple of things apart for you here, because when it comes to relativism, there's more than one kind. And I want to point this out as somebody that has been in a department of philosophy at a university. Don't blame the departments of philosophy for this. Usually you need to go over into the departments of anthropology and sociology if you want to blame people for this. You go into departments of philosophy and they find relativism to be basically two things. It's incoherent and it's unlivable. You actually can't live it, right? So they may be utilitarians, they may be something like that, but you're not really going to run into bona fide relativists in departments of philosophy. It's more those people that go from culture to culture like an anthropologist, make some observation, and then pull a conclusion from it that's not particularly helpful. Okay? So I just want to say that on the front end. But when it comes to relativism, there's more than one kind. There's not just one kind. Postmodernism, you've probably heard the word postmodernism. I think at times postmodernism gets a bad rap. And the reason that I say that is not because I'm a postmodernist, I'm actually not. But what they're trying to say is there can be some real struggles at getting at what the truth is. And I actually agree with them at times. Because there are times that we're looking at things through a specific lens. And we're just kind of locked into it, like we're not listening, right? And if you have what's called motivated reasoning, that can keep you from seeing the truth. You've probably experienced this before when people, maybe your mom and dad were trying to correct you when you were a child and you're going, oh. That's an example of motivated reasoning, right? It wasn't cutting through, but mom and dad, they were right. There are all kinds of things, experiences that you've had, the education that you come from, those kinds of, they can impact the way that you see things. But what it doesn't mean, and most postmodernists would even say, it doesn't mean there's not the truth. It just means it can be really tough to get to it. Kind of have to chop the weeds, right? We have to chop the weeds. That said, where I typically ran into relativism was when I had freshmen in my college class. And I always said, the reason that you want to be relativist is because you want a moral framework to justify what you're about to go do now that you're away from mom and dad. Is that fair or is that fair, right? I mean, who are you to judge me? When I read the thing from Ted Bundy, there were a couple of things that probably popped out. There were probably a lot of things that popped out to you. But remember what he said. Number one, he said, all value judgments are subjective. So let's start there. When you're dealing with relativism, one brand of relativism is called that. It's called subjectivism. What it means is that the only one that adjudicates something to be moral or immoral is literally yourself. It's you. It's not me telling you. It's not you telling me. It is you deciding for yourself what is moral. When you think of subjectivism, you need to be thinking of a very rugged, individualistic approach to ethics. Does that make sense? That's subjectivism. And we'll talk about this here in a little bit on how they get there. But that would be an example, which is why he said later, he said, if you multiply 1 million value judgments by 0, did you catch that? It doesn't make it one whit more rational. Now, what does that mean when he said that? Throw it out there. What do you think he was saying?
If one doesn't matter, it doesn't matter how many there are. Like, if it doesn't matter in the first one, if it matters 0 here, it doesn't matter how many times he does it.
So you said, if it doesn't matter here, where's the here?
Anywhere, wherever he's at.
A little bit more specific. Him. It's for him. Right? So, no, that's exactly right. So, notice what he said. If you can multiply 1 million, there can be 1 million people saying that this is wrong, but until I say it's wrong or right, it's not one whit more rational. If you hear something like that, what you know that you've run into is a subjectivist. They think that all moral deliberations and all moral judgments literally boil down to you. They boil down to you, right? Now, there's a different kind of relativism, and it's usually called conventionalism. It gets beyond you. And this might be actually one of the strengths of the view, even though at the end of the day it's going to be incoherent and unlivable. But the idea behind conventionalism is we determine what is right and wrong. We do. So there's nothing objective with regard to moral statements. There's nothing objective. So if you were to say, it's a part of the furniture of the universe, moral statements are, or it's true at all times and all places that torturing children for the fun of it is morally wrong. They'd be like, well, no, we're not going to say that because there's still no fixed nature of truth. However, we, like as a society, we will come to an agreement on what is morally right and morally wrong. Does that make sense? So you've gone from subjectivism, that's you, to society is going to be making these kinds of moral judgments. Well, how do you get here? How do you get to a place where you say, yeah, I think that this is a viable moral theory? I'm going to give you a couple of things to think about. And this is the first. It's often called the argument from diversity. The argument from diversity. So this goes back to a guy named Herodotus. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. And the basic idea is that relativism is based on the fact that different cultures and groups often appear to have radically different ethical norms and values. That's diversity. Make sense? If you were to do business ethics, for example, in the United States, are you supposed to do bribes? Do we have any business people here? Are you supposed to be doing bribes? Nope. You're not. Are you doing bribes? No, don't. We all want to know. No, you're not, right? And what are some of the reasons that you think, at least here, that we say, you know what, bribery is actually not good for business? Does anybody want to throw something out?
Foreign corrupt practices.
Okay, so you can get into corrupt practices pretty quickly, right? For example, you have anything in mind?
Oil companies buying influence in other companies.
Okay, so oil companies buying influence, purely hypothetical. Purely hypothetical. Oil companies buying influence, right? Okay, good. That would be an example. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to throw something out? It can lead to a monopoly, which theoretically we don't have those, but anywho, right? No, it's good. And the problem with monopoly would be?
No competition.
No competition. And the problem with no competition is?
Prices go up.
Prices go up, right? Okay, good. Anybody else want to throw something out there?
Price fixing.
Specifically, like something you have in mind? Price fixing?
You get together and say, we're going to charge this much for this.
Okay. Yeah, okay,
If there's
good.
not a monopoly, the three big guys can get together and collude.
Yeah, so, and I think that may be what Mike is getting at. So if you don't have these provisions in place, then you can have like 2 or 3 companies that are colluding together and all the money is going to them and everybody else basically just like, done, right? You get the idea. There are reasons for saying we're not going to allow this as a practice. Has anybody gone to Japan and done business? Do they do bribes over there?
Not as bad as Korea.
Not as bad as Korea. I already knew the answer, Mike. Right? Yeah.
Define bribes.
Yeah. So look at this guy. He's here for a week. He's like, I need a definition. Oh man! All right. So, did you do some business in Japan? You did. Was it a part of the? Is it culturally accepted to gifts, for example? This is Matthew's question of a definition, right? Yeah. Of course, I'll receive that gift from you. Bribery is practiced, right? Yep. And in fact, is it not true that it's considered to be good business practice? And the answer is, yes, it is. Now, I'm only giving you this as an example, right? We could do more, and I think Mike wanted to do a rant about Korea. And you know what? I tell you what, when we're done, I'm going to give him the floor and be like, let me tell you what they do over there. Okay, do you see why in the U.S. we go, I'm not saying bribes don't happen here because I mean, get real, but at least in theory, you can see we have reasons for this. It's not the best practice. Over there, it's like, this actually is good stuff. It's good practice. It just makes good business sense, right? Okay. That would be an argument from diversity. Does that make sense? You see a diverse expression on the same practice. Let me give you another example. If you were to read Plato's Republic, or at least so it's argued, homosexual conduct is permitted in ancient Greece. And in ancient, we're gonna get into sexual ethics a little bit later, so I'm not trying to debate it now. I'm just letting you know that it's there. So if you read in Plato's Republic, often there was rites of passage in ancient Greece where older men would actually have sex with thinking like teenagers, almost like a rite of passage. It was just a part of the culture. In the same time, you had other cultures that said that it was morally prohibited. So Greece and Rome, not so much. Other cultures, this is morally wrong. This is another example of the argument from diversity. You see different moral practices from one culture to another. In some cultures, you see even today, you see the practice of polygamy. They don't have any problem with it. In other cultures, you see that only monogamy is considered morally legitimate. Even now, you have fundamentalist LDS, fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, that would still have no problem with polygamy. Then you would have more conservative LDS that would say, no, that was wrong, shouldn't have been like that. So even within a culture, you see some disagreement. Make sense? That would be an example of an argument from diversity. There are cultures that have practiced infanticide, literally the killing, not of a child in the womb, but of a child. The child is born. They have practiced infanticide, allowing the parents a choice whether to kill a child after birth, and other cultures strongly disapprove of this. I don't know if you know this, but if you were to look in, for example, the Eskimos. The Eskimos have practiced infanticide because there gets a time, and especially in the winter, when there's a lack of resources and those kinds of things, and you realize something's probably going to have to give here. And so the morally sufficient reason that they have given as to why they would kill a child is because, well, sustainability. Sustainability. I don't know if you knew that about the Eskimos, but there you go. They actually allow the practice of infanticide. That would be another example of the argument from diversity. I'm not asking you to agree with them. I'm letting you know. All right, here's another one. Let's look at witchcraft. Rodney Stark is a historian, and he says that one of the reasons for the execution of witches, so if you think go back like Salem or something like that, one of the reasons for the execution of witches occurred was because of certain non-ethical beliefs that were prevalent at that time. So in the 14th century, at least this is what he was saying, in the 14th century, many educated people believed in the existence of witches. It was believed that witches met together secretly and they sacrificed children to the devil and ate these sacrifices in a ritual feast. After the feast, these people bound themselves by oath to the devil to use supernatural powers to inflict harm and to kill innocent people. Now I'm quoting the historian Rodney Stark here. And here's what he goes on to say. Now, given these beliefs, it's a little more understandable why some in society felt the way that they did. Does that seem fair? Are y'all tracking him yet? This is his example, not mine. I didn't go do the research. I just read him, right? Here's what he said. If in our culture people randomly killed and ate babies and then conspired to arbitrarily kill other people, harm and maim innocent people, many would support their actions being subject to the death penalty. The point, and this is what he said, and now we go back to one of the categories we talked about last week. He said the point is that the factual, remember that? Not the ethical claims were the source of disagreement in the culture. What was really going on? Were there really ritual sacrifices, baby eatings, and whatnot? That's a matter of fact. But if it's really going on, here's what Rodney Stark says, it tends to change the way that people see what happened back then. Those people were doing really atrocious things, if they were really doing it. Make sense? If they were doing really atrocious things. That would be another example of the diversity thesis. And I give you those examples to make this point on behalf of the relativist. You see different practices, right? People are doing different things, which is what leads you to believe maybe morality isn't fixed. Maybe it's not set. All right, so I'm going to stop for a second. I'm not done, but I'm going to ask a question. Does everything that I've said so far make sense? I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Are y'all tracking with me so far? We're good? Because I don't want to keep trucking on if you're out there going, what? I just want to know that we're all on the same page right now. Are we good? Yes?
Does ethics or morality by definition have to have an overlay of how it plays out in a society between people?
Well, so the question is, does ethics always have to basically have a canopy for society is basically what you're saying.
Yeah, there's some lens of
it
has to work.
Yeah, at the end of the day, this is the catch with ethics. It's unavoidable. It's absolutely unavoidable. Let me give you an example. We'll talk about sexual ethics later on, but I was doing, I mentioned I did theology on tap. So I'm down there, we were in this discussion on God and sex. What does the Bible really say about this stuff? And I was defending a traditional Christian ethic and traditional view of marriage, right? And one of the things that I said, and especially when we were talking about disagreements on sexuality, as I said, we need to put some of our little catchphrases to rest because they're not helpful. They're not helping the conversation. So, for example, and I told them, I'm here to defend a traditional sexual ethic. That's what I'm going to do. But what you don't need to do is to name call me for it. What you don't need to do is to say I hate you, because I don't. You're making an assumption about my motives. I don't, and you'll understand why by the time I'm done. But here's the other thing. If you want to say that I'm judgmental, then I'm actually going to agree with you. I am. But everybody in this room is. Because here's why, and it's not that difficult. If I were to say, for example, and this is just to make the point, if I were to say, for example, homosexuality is morally permissible, I just made a moral judgment. I just did it. If I say homosexuality is morally impermissible, I just made a judgment. And here's what I said. So now that we've identified that we're all judgmental, let's don't go that way tonight. It's not helpful. I mean, it's name calling, but I don't think you're getting as much out of it as you think. We're all going to make a judgment about it. What we want is we want to make good judgments about things. There are good moral judgments. There are bad moral judgments. And by the way, everybody in that room agreed with me. They're like, yes. I said, because everybody in this room would be willing to put a boundary on some sexual practices, and it won't take me very long to prove it. How many of you, so this was after the fact, the night's done, and they're like, if you want to talk to our speakers and panelists, you can ask them whatever you want. And I was like, I didn't know we were doing that tonight. Well, here comes all the people. Well, great. It's late. I've been up since 6. Got to drive back. All right, let's do it. Right. So we're having these conversations, and this is what I said. So I've got this group. Poor Wendy. She's there. She is with me, going, he's trapped. But it was great. It was fine. Here was what I said. Look. It's not going to take you long to put a boundary on what you think is legitimate and illegitimate sexual practices. And a number of the people I was talking with were gay and lesbian transgender. I said, so for example, are all of you okay with it? But I said, I actually have a sexual attraction to 1-year-old babies. I don't. I said, would you be okay with that? And they're like, no. And I said, okay. Then you get it more than you think. We're all going to be putting boundaries on things. And the reason is because we have to. We need guardrails. If all I did was read Ted Bundy to people, pretty much everybody in the room would go, hey, we need some moral guardrails, y'all. Everybody would agree with me because they would look at what he did and go, all right, that's out of bounds. You can't be raping and murdering women. And I would go, I agree. I totally agree. He disagreed, right? Everything that we're talking about, it's inevitable. It's inevitable. Now, I'm going to unpack for you in a couple of weeks. We'll get into social contract. Is what we're talking about just a matter of we consent to things? We'll get there. But that's a long answer that I hope was a helpful one to your question, which was yes, absolutely. I'm going to give you one more example from the diversity thesis, and then we'll move on. But how are we doing so far? We good? Okay. Did you know that there are cultures that when you go into them, this is going to sound strange, but it is true, that when you go into them, the way that they would show hospitality, like if, Wendy's not here tonight, but if the way that they would show hospitality to me, if Wendy and I came into their culture, is that I would actually have sex with another man's wife. So the husband actually leaves the home for the night. I am welcomed into the home for the night, and the way that they would welcome me in would be that I would actually have sex with the wife. They consider it an act of hospitality. Now you go to other parts of the world. I'm just letting you know. I'm not saying I did it or have been there. I haven't been there and I haven't done it. You're welcome, Wendy. But it's descriptive. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. Hello? We've been talking for 2 weeks now. But notice this. If you go to other cultures, are you going to see something like that? Probably not. Probably not. You get the idea. Diverse practices. Diverse practices. Okay. Here we go. I think you've got the idea. So now that we've got that at least out of the way, there's the diversity thesis. This is basically what it says. Moral beliefs vary from culture to culture. And even though most people in our culture believe infanticide is immoral, the Roman writer Seneca said this: "We destroy monstrous births, and we also drown our children if they're born weakly or unnaturally formed." Okay. So here's what they would say, just for a review. Some of the differences might be based on things that we value. For example, some indigenous groups kill their parents before the parent becomes senile. But here's why. Here's why. Some of you might say that's cruel, and we're going to get to life and death later. I'm just giving you an example. If you believe that the afterlife resembles the state in which you die, you might understand their way of thinking. I'm not saying they're right. I'm not saying that. But you look at it and you go, why would you kill Grandpa? And the answer is, well, because what I believe happens in the afterlife is if he becomes senile here, he's senile there. You see a difference? Again, I'm not saying it's right. I just want you to get it. I just want you to get it. They say it, they actually see it in that culture as a way of loving and respecting them. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just saying it's the way they see it. So that's the diversity thesis. Here's the second one. It's called the relativity thesis. Moral beliefs are true relative to some group. This is based on the diversity thesis in case you didn't catch it, right? Moral beliefs are relative to some group. So this is important. They believe that there are moral truths. They deny these truths are absolute. Did you catch that? They believe that there are truths. They just deny that they're absolute. There are a lot of moral truths. And then last but not least, and then we're going to evaluate this for a second. It's called the toleration thesis. Have you ever been told that you're intolerant? No? You start standing up for something, man. I'm harassing the locals here. All right. The toleration thesis. This is the idea. We should not pass judgment or attempt to forcibly change the moral beliefs of other cultures or persons. Cultures or persons. Get it? Subjectivism or conventionalism. Shouldn't do it. Shouldn't do it. So, of course, if your culture does not require people to be tolerant, then you have no obligation to be tolerant. I wanted to throw that in there for free, but still, there you go. You need to be tolerant of these other moral beliefs and practices. Let them be them, or let him or her be him or her. All right. Let's evaluate this for just a little bit. Are y'all ready to evaluate this for a little bit? I've given you a lot of examples tonight, people. What to do with this, and especially in response to a lot of what we see in Generation Z. Gen Z is really enjoys relativism with regard to ethics and God, specifically. So as long as you believe something sincerely, right? That could be Islam, that could be Christianity. You get the idea. They're comfortable with that, at least statistically speaking. I want to jump in and say, let's dig a little deeper here, right? Let's evaluate moral relativism. So here's number one for those of you that are note-taking. Defining the society or culture to which a judgment is relative is difficult. Did you catch what I just said? Defining the society or the culture to which a judgment is relative is difficult. It's difficult. I'm going to give you an example to help make the point. James is a Catholic. Bill is an atheist. Are they from different cultures? Is there, huh? They look at the nature of reality differently. James is a Catholic. He believes that God exists. There's a supernatural. What did I say the guy's name? I made him up. Bill. Sorry, I forgot the guy's name that I made up. Bill is an atheist. He doesn't believe that there's God. He doesn't believe that there's an afterlife. James believes all those things. What makes a culture a culture? Or imagine that you're James and you're an attorney and you go into a firm. Now the firm, by its practices, are affirming of and in fact sponsoring, giving to pro-choice groups, like substantial amounts of money. James, on the other hand, is a Catholic, which, by the way, if you don't know, they are not pro-choice, right? So there. Which culture is James a part of? Do you see how this gets difficult really quick? Culture can be kind of tough. Is he a part of two cultures? Well, when I go to work, I'm liberal, but when I leave, I'm Catholic again. Does that work? You get the idea? Okay. But so that's one point. That's one point. Defining the society or culture. So, for example, would you say that there's a fixed set of values in the United States? Like if you say a culture is a country, have you looked around this place? So how many cultures are there in the United States? Depends on how you define a culture, but the answer is probably a ton. Probably a ton. Do you see why I'm saying just even the idea of the word culture is really tricky? It's tricky. Here's the second thing. Moral relativism makes moral decision-making either impossible or too easy. It either makes it impossible or too easy. Let me tell you why. Let's say that you are holding to conventionalism. Society determines these things, right? We do it. Well, if morality is determined by the consensus, then the majority opinion on a matter tells society whether it's right or wrong. Right? It would be majority opinion. If no consensus on an issue exists, then there's no way to determine the morality of an action. So on the one hand, it makes it easy. On the other hand, it might make it impossible. Is there a consensus on things? No. Well, what do you do with that? Does that make sense? It can make it impossible, or it can make it too easy. Well, I'll tell you what, we're just going to kind of go around the room here and take a vote. And there you go. See, that was easy. Now, what about the people that were in the 37%? Because they were going, hey, I live here too. Right? You go, yeah, but, we had the numbers. Right? We had the numbers. And so, sucks to be you. And if you want to, maybe you need to go find a different place where you're in the 51% that think the way that you do. And I'm not being mean or cute. That's actually the way it works. That's the way it works. Here's number 3. If you really buy into moral relativism, it makes moral progress literally impossible. It's literally impossible. It won't happen. It can't happen. For example, if you talk about society, I don't know if you know this about our history, but did you know we once tolerated slavery? Now we find it repugnant. Now here's why I give that example. Even though we changed, it doesn't mean that there was moral progress. Remember, there's nothing objectively wrong about slavery, right? This is relativism. You can't all of a sudden go, well, except for that. No, it doesn't work like that. You've already said that this is the way that relativism works. You can't play it both ways. You can't talk out of both sides of your mouth. So what that would mean is all we did was change our mind. We're doing things differently. But what you can't say is we're doing things morally better. We're just doing things differently. It makes moral progress literally impossible. Does that make sense? Here's the next one for you. It implies that moral reformers are wrong for what they do. Think about it for a second. Francis Beckwith at Baylor University. Got any bears in here tonight? There you go. I knew Uncle Don would I knew he'd jump up, right? He makes this point, totally borrow it from him. It implies that moral reformers are wrong for what they do. Think about it. If society determines what is morally right and morally wrong, and you have a moral reformer telling, I don't care if 99% of you think this, you're wrong. They're actually wrong for doing it. Did you catch that? They're wrong for doing it. The civil rights movement acted in contrast to Jim Crow laws in the South. So if the truth of a moral statement is based on the standard of a culture, then what Martin Luther King Jr. did was wrong. by that standard. It was wrong. The same would be true of Gandhi when he was trying to fight against the caste system in India. It was wrong. That was culturally accepted and culturally practiced. What he did by this standard would be wrong. By the way, the same would be true of Jesus. Have you thought about that? If you really buy this stuff, then the reform that Jesus was trying to make when he walked into an existing culture, he actually did something that would be morally wrong if this moral theory is right. Y'all tracking me now? It doesn't make any sense. However, when you look at these examples, and I could give you more, most people look at these folks and go, we needed them. We needed William Wilberforce. Y'all know who he is? Who was he, Tom Billings?
He was in England, fought against slavery.
He's the guy in England that at one point actually didn't have any problem with the practice of slavery, but he was the guy that did not give up until they revoked the practice of slavery. There's actually, I think, a movie made about it, isn't there? Is the movie called Amazing Grace? Yeah, the movie's called Amazing Grace. That's his story, right? Now, think of William Wilberforce and skip culture. We'll just talk about him. Let's say that subjectivism is true. All he did was change his mind. He's not morally better or worse for it. He just was different. England was just different, but they weren't morally better or morally worse. You get the idea. Are y'all tracking so far? Here's another one. Morally contradictory statements are actually not a problem. And that's where there are parts of me where my logic wires just start to fire and I go, no, we can't do this. We just can't do this. Morally contradictory statements are perfectly fine. At best, if this theory is true, at best, what we can say is they are wrong according to what I believe, but they're not wrong according to what they believe. That's the best that you can get. I don't agree with you, but I can't judge you. Why? Well, because there's no fixed nature to moral truth or moral judgments. We just disagree. We're saying slavery is wrong. You're saying slavery is right. Somebody's got to be right. And somebody's got to be wrong. Not if this theory is true, right? Not if this theory is true. People struggle with this idea. Boy, do I have a lot of examples. I'm trying to think of what I do and don't do to you people tonight, right? We got a lot to go in the future, and so I'm going to hold off on some things. But people struggle with this idea when involved. And I'm talking about this idea of this is the way that moral statements work. People struggle with this idea when it involves cannibals eating human beings. Hold on to that, because next week we begin with cannibals. And it's a true story. All right, even better. People struggle with this idea, there's no fixed truth here. Yeah, what about people eating people? Yeah, I want to say something's off there. Good. I agree with you. Or here's another example. Nazis torturing innocent human beings, even children and babies. Have you ever read any history on World War II? And have you ever looked at what Joseph Mengele used to do when he did studies on Jewish children? Have you ever read it? Because he would literally take their arms and snap them, and then do basically medical experimentation on people about their pain levels. All right, I'm going to stop there. But is that enough? People typically, when you get examples like this, people typically go, I want to say that's wrong, and I want to agree with them. But if this theory is true, I can't. I can't. We just talk about different matters of taste. So college students might say that they're relativists. And I'll be honest with you, most of them didn't. I'll tell you, y'all want a funny story? Here's a funny one. When I was teaching moral theory at A&M, I actually said, I'm not going to put a lot of parameters on you for your term paper, but I'm going to put one. Don't give a defense of moral relativism. Don't. I mean, if you want to defend utilitarianism, some deontological theory, something like that, you knock yourself out. Do not try to defend moral relativism. And don't you know I had a student do it? So, and this was the time in defense of moral relativism, and I was like, oh, dang it. All right. So, as the professor, I'm like, I'm going to read it. So, I read through the whole thing. I didn't even have a pen in my hand. Usually by the time that students got to the end of their paper and saw their grade, they were like, oh, thank God it's an 86. I mean, I marked it up. I wanted them better. I wasn't going to put a number on the end. I wanted them better for it. So they wrote their paper, right? And I just put a 0 on the last page and gave it back, right? Here's what I knew. I knew the student was going to reach out to me, right? Not another mark on the paper, just a grade. And so they reached out to me and they said, can we get together? And I said, sure. And so we got together. And this is the predicament that the student found themselves in, and I think you know where this is going, right? Because the student sits down and says, I disagree with this grade. And I said, why? Why do you disagree with this grade? Because it's not fair. I said, not according to you. Not according to you. Actually, all I did was live in line with what I wanted to give you for your paper. I was acting in accordance with my true and authentic self. Now, bless her heart. I mean, so I said, so here's the thing. One, I knew that you were going to reach back out because who wants a 0 on a paper, right? I'm going to give you a second chance. Not because you deserve it, because you don't. You don't. I gave them a range of things to write on. Here's some things, and it was more than one thing. Here's some things I don't want you writing on. This was one of them, and she still did it. She still did it. I said, I'm going to give you a chance to rewrite this on one of the other topics that I said was an acceptable topic. But never forget this moment. If you are right in your paper, then you are wrong in this room. You cannot have it both ways. Now get out! No, I'm kidding. I didn't do that. Oh, she got it. Yeah, I think that was the moment where she was like, I'm going to go write another paper. And so, was able to give her an incomplete. It was all fine, right? There you go. So that's basically kind of the place that I wanted to end it tonight. I said we would jump into an ethical theory, unpack what it is. I think we need to take it seriously because you'll hear it. But I hope that I've given you enough reason tonight, and I could give you more, but I want to give you sufficient to know this is not the way to go. This one's not the way to go. We'll get into some other ethical theories later on that involve God and other things, but I wanted to open up the floor to questions, and that's how we'll end it tonight. Grace, is your hand up, girl?
Yes, it is.
I couldn't tell. All right, go for it.
Piggybacking off of the example that you gave with the student, and not doubting your research and everything you've told us about relativism and all of its forms, I come to the point where I'm thinking even the most staunch relativist is going to come to a point in their life where that theory or thesis bites them in the backside, like that student.
Mhm.
So I wonder, and I don't even know if you can answer this, if anybody could live life and be truly a relativist.
As I pointed out, you really don't run into relativism in the departments of philosophy. Part of the reason why is I gave you reasons why they would say it's indefensible, but it's unlivable. Like if you're going to say that ethics guides your steps, it guides the decisions that you make, it hits the ground really fast, right? So if you're really going to tell someone that relativism is true, you're not going to base any system of law on it. It's just not going to happen. So that should make you a little suspicious of it right off the bat. The other thing is there would be no way. So if you take Ted Bundy, right? So as I read Ted Bundy at the beginning of it, and boy, there was a lot to say about what that guy said. But Ted Bundy changed his mind. I don't know if you know that. But before he was executed, he had asked to meet with, I think, James Dobson. I think. Yeah, I think he'd asked to meet with James Dobson and focus on the family. And one of the reasons that he wanted to meet with James Dobson was because he said somebody has got to do something about the evils of pornography. Did you know that? He said, because there's not one person back here with me that I don't know, that I know that doesn't have a serious addiction to it and has been seriously impacted by it. Now, you listen to what I read to you, and I'm like, well, did you change your mind? Because it sounds like you did. And there's some stories that maybe there had been a conversion or something like that. I don't know. I'm not going to say I don't know. I don't know. But it seems like he's saying something categorically the opposite of what he was saying here when he was justifying what he did. Instead, he was looking at something else. He was looking at pornography and calling it a great evil. Right? You know, somebody that actually said something that really smacked of relativism was Richard Dawkins. You know, he's a famous atheist. He's written a number of books over the years. But if you go back to, I think it was a book called River Out of Eden, which is kind of a jab in the title at people that have belief in God. One of the things that he said is look, if God doesn't exist, then at the bottom of things, there is no good and no evil. There is no right and no wrong. And I'm like, well, if God doesn't exist, right? And that's a big if. But you're right. Because where would it come from? What's the source of it? So I point out Richard Dawkins, basically, he was thinking through it and going, if I'm right, then I kind of have to say something like this. But the same guy ends up doing a documentary series called Religion, the Root of All Evil. And I thought, well, no, not according to you. It's just people doing things that you don't like, right? So inevitably, so I'll give you those two examples basically to help make your point. I think others would go the way too. Boom. Something ran into Richard Dawkins that he didn't like, and particularly in that case, it was Islamic beliefs, right? Boom, and all of a sudden he's got a moral category by which he's going to judge it. And I was like, but you already said you can't. Right? You said it, not me. You said it. And it's the same with Ted Bundy. I mean, what if, later on, Ted Bundy's like, somebody's got to do something about the evils of pornography. And I think I'm right on that. It's like pornography. Somebody's got to do something about the evils of pornography. And they go, well, if you multiply 1 million value judgments by 0, it doesn't make it one whit more rational. That just wasn't where he was at. He's like, something has got to stop this.
So if you didn't have a conversion, you at least had some sort of a realization.
Yeah, and I'm not speaking for or against the conversion, so I don't know. I'm telling you I don't know. But I am telling you
I
that.
think it's easy to be relative when you're trying to justify something you do rather than something that's done against you. So people will claim relativism
Yeah.
when it suits them.
It gets you what you want.
If it makes him feel more desensitized to what he's doing in one category, but maybe that's not something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
No, yeah, it gets you.
I don't know.
No, that's
I'm
right.
just saying,
It's an easy way to get you what you want. It does get you there. I don't think anybody in the room is wondering that. It does get
I
you.
don't think it works because I think eventually you're going to run into something like you were saying, where you're morally not okay,
Well,
or it's not okay.
Well, but think about even if you take it on that society determines what is, and I point out even the idea of a culture is kind of hard to define. Let's go back to World War II. People were making moral judgments about the Germans, right? But if conventionalism is true, then we didn't have a moral foot to stand on to judge the things that they were doing. They're just different.
Admiral Dönitz.
I didn't hear you.
Admiral Dönitz.
Admiral Dönitz?
Yeah, he was the admiral for the Nazis and was in charge of all of the sinkings of all the
Mhm,
ships
yeah.
and the submarines. That was his plan. And the Nuremberg trial
Yeah.
wanted to put him to death. And it was Chester Nimitz that came to the Nuremberg trial and said, if you're going to kill him, you have to kill me, because I did the exact same thing to the Japanese.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they didn't execute him.
Yeah. But you see the problem, if you're making a moral judgment, part of the reason that we're going to go to war is because of the things that they're doing. And somebody needs to make this stop. That's like a moral argument for war. Okay, we'll actually get to war a little bit later on. I think you get it. But this theory won't give that to you. Does that make any sense? This theory won't get you there. It won't. There's different. So over there, they exterminate Jews. In the U.S., we don't. I mean, you could say that. That's about as far as you're going to go. That would be another example. I don't know if that helps, Grace, but there you go.
Are all the different theories and the values and morals kind of like, everybody does what's right in their own eyes, kind of like in Judges? Is Is it the same comparison as like the judges back in them days?
Yeah,
Everybody did what was right in their eyes, is that the difference in all the different?
We'll get, so for example, next week we'll get into utilitarianism. And I'm not gonna endorse utilitarianism as like just this full-on endorsement of it. But I will tell you this, most of you have had utilitarian thoughts. You've used it in the way that you make decisions. If you've ever said something like this, look, we're just trying to do what's best for the most. You were already getting there, right? Now we'll unpack it next week. So that's a little bit more intuitive to you and probably to most of the people in the room. Like if what I just said, you go, yeah, I've done that before, right? It's a little bit more intuitive than the stuff we talked about tonight. The main reason I was talking about tonight is because how often have you heard something like this? And it's because of its popularity. It's more on the popular level than it is anything else. Like I said, in the academy, you don't have a bunch of these people running around. But on the streets, yeah, you really do. So like I said, you hear, well, that's, you do you. I'll actually end with this. And then we'll pick up next week with cannibalism. It's going to be great. But this was a hoot. So I'm in this panel, right? And out from the people, you hear that saying, "You do you," and I was like, I would have said that to Hitler back in the day, and everybody just went whoop, and they stopped. And it was a little bit snarky, a smidge. But I felt like I had that relationship with him already. We had jabbed back and forth. I was like, we're jabbing, here's a jab. Hitler, you do you. And everybody just stopped. And I was like, why not him? Why not him? And everybody goes, because what he was doing was morally atrocious. And I go, totally agree. So maybe you don't, you do you. Maybe don't. Maybe think about what you do, right? Rather than just this unilateral statement that's not morally helpful, right? Okay. All right, we're done, friends. Was tonight of good use to you? We'll pick up with utilitarianism next week. I'm going to put you in some situations, so y'all be prayed up. Speaking of prayer, I'm going to pray our way out. I hope you have an awesome week. I hope to see you at either 9 o'clock or 10:30 on Sunday. And let me encourage you just to bring a friend to come and worship with us. It's going to be a great morning. Let's pray. Thank you, Lord, for being good and kind to us and helpful to us. Holy Spirit, we thank you that you don't leave us without guidance for our life. You're the great helper. And we thank you for being with us because there are times where we genuinely have difficult deliberations that we have to make. And we want to thank you. We thank you, Lord, for giving us your word. It guides us and instructs us. It helps us. You're present with us. You've shown us your own mind and your word. I pray, Lord, that you would help us to be diligent to study it so that we can know you better. And just as we leave, I pray that we would be a blessing at least to one person, at least to one. Somebody that just needs to see the love of Jesus. I pray, Lord, that they would see that in us. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.